This is the U.S. Report.
Good evening and welcome to the program. I'm Caleb Bond in the chair for James Morrow this week. Coming up tonight, Donald Trump has avoided endorsing a national abortion ban, starving the Democrats of another scare campaign. The lefty media opt out of covering Death to America chants on home soil, but US inflation is surging, but the left just won't accept it. Well, President Biden signalled this week that maybe, just maybe, something might be done about the porous US southern border. We know that more than 7 million illegal immigrants have basically sauntered across the Mexican border into America since Biden became president. And he's in an election year, so, he has to start looking like he's doing something about it, because the consequences are starting to bite. So he was interviewed by Spanish language TV station Univision this week and hinted that an executive order to effectively shut down the border could be on the cards, but it came with a caveat.
Have you made a final decision on taking executive order in terms of what you want to do at the border? That includes the power to shut down the border, as it was suggested.
Well, it suggested that. We're examining whether or not I have that power. I would have that power under the legislation when the border has over 500,000 people, 5,000 people a day trying to cross the border because you can't manage it, slow it up. There's no guarantee that I have that power all by myself without legislation. And some have suggested I should just go ahead and try it. And if I get shut down by the court, I get shut down by the court. But we're trying to work through that right now.
Well, maybe I don't have the power, maybe it'll be shut down by the court. Cut the crap. Donald Trump instituted a number of executive orders and proclamations under his presidency to help stem the flow of illegal immigrants. They included an executive order to secure the border and begin building a wall, and a proclamation making immigrants who entered the US without inspection ineligible for asylum. Trump also issued presidential memos that stopped some asylum seekers from seeking any other form of immigration relief, required adjudication of asylum cases within 180 days of filing, imposed an application fee for asylum claims, banned people who entered the US without inspection from getting work authorization while their applications were pending, stopped the Department of Homeland Security releasing migrants from detention while their immigration cases were pending, and sent the National Guard to secure the southwest border. None of those were illegal, and Biden reversed them all via another executive order on February 2, 2021, effectively reopening the southern border to illegal immigrants. There was no problem with any of that, but Biden now wants us to believe that trying to secure the border again is fraught with danger and could be struck down by the courts. He also wants us to believe that he, the man who reopened the border, is now concerned enough to close it. You wouldn't have to close the border if you hadn't opened it. Just hours after being sworn in as president in 2021, Biden started reversing Trump's immigration policies. He straight away sent legislation to Congress to open up citizenship to migrants living in the US illegally, and issued executive actions to stop building the border wall and include illegal immigrants in counting for congressional districts, i.e. states with more illegal immigrants get more representation in Congress. Homeland Security, they then issued a memorandum with a 100-day stay on some deportations and stopping the migrant protection protocols instituted under Trump that sent asylum seekers back to Mexico to wait for court hearings. And of course, this concern about the court striking things down didn't stop Biden trying to waive hundreds of billions of dollars of student debt, which even Nancy Pelosi said wasn't possible 2 years ago.
People think that the President of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress.
He tried anyway, and it was eventually stopped by the Supreme Court. Just a few months ago, the Biden administration was still actively stifling attempts to stop people pouring across the Mexican border. When Texas put up a razor wire in an effort to keep illegal immigrants out, the Biden administration went to the Supreme Court to get the power to cut the wire down. And yet we're now meant to believe Biden wants to do something to close the border. Illegals have essentially been actively encouraged to enter the US since Biden became president. New York City gives them prepaid debit cards to spend to their heart's content. They've been put up in hotels with 3 square meals a day. Those accused of committing serious crimes are not deported. Jose Antonio Ibarra, a Venezuelan illegal charged with murdering a nurse, not deported. When a bunch of illegal immigrants bashed up a New York police officer, a bunch of New York police officers earlier this year, they were released on bail and fled the state. Why wouldn't you want to enter the US illegally when this is how you're treated? And listen to the impeached Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, this week, when he was asked about the rising number of Chinese people illegally entering the US.
How many Chinese nationals have crossed our border in the last couple of years?
And the fight against forced labor, whether that is battling...
That's not Homeland Security. I appreciate that, but that's not Homeland Security.
Secondly...
I'm asking you about the border. How many Chinese nationals have crossed our border?
I'd be pleased to provide that data.
It's tens of thousands. It's
secondly,
tens of thousands.
Secondly, the threat of cyber attacks.
Right now, crossing our border are tens of thousands of Chinese nationals who are not presently in our country. They are primarily single-aged, adult male, military-aged, and they've crossed our border. And you are not doing anything to counteract that.
The number of Chinese nationals that have illegally crossed the US border this financial year is up 6,300% compared to 2021, by the way, and Mayorkas has no interest at all. The Biden administration has no control of the borders whatsoever. And why would they want to? The hope, of course, is that all these people who illegally stream across the border will one day become citizens and vote for the Democrats. I mean, who else would they vote for? Biden teasing that he might do something about the border is a classic case of talking out of both sides of his mouth. And we know how difficult it is for Biden to talk in any way at all. He knows that the US is heaving under the pressure of these migrants at a time of high inflation, and that of course counts against him with many voters. But he also needs these people as future voters. I'll believe there are border controls when I see them. Well, let's bring in a great friend of the show, Adam Crichton, Washington correspondent, of course, for The Australian. Adam, welcome. You had presidential nominee Donald Trump declining this week to endorse a national abortion ban. He said that on Monday. Instead, he says it should be left to the states. Now, I think from any perspective, that's a good idea. The more power that is decentralised and is in the hands of the state is good for America in general. Your piece this week, Adam, delved into why the Biden campaign, though, wouldn't be so happy about this.
Yeah, certainly that's right. Well, basically, Donald Trump denied Democrats the ability to run a huge scare campaign in the lead up to the election. I mean, they were really itching for Republicans to propose some sort of ban, whether it be after 6 weeks or 15 weeks or whatever it is. But Trump, I think, has been very clever politically, and he said, look, let's just leave it up to the states. That, after all, is now the law of the land in the US, following the Dobbs decision, which was June 2022, I believe. So it's back in the hands of the states, just like it is in Australia, I might add. So it's really not, not such a crazy concept. So yes, it makes perfect sense. And it's worth pointing out that, well over 50% of Americans think that abortion should be legal in some cases, at least some cases. And so, the last thing Trump wanted was a big fight on this in the lead up to November, when there are so many other things to talk about, the southern border, inflation, etc.
There are a couple of states, though, will be having a question on presidential election day on the ballot paper about abortion. What effect do you think that might have when people come out to vote? Knowing how fractured the US is, the majority, you say, support abortion. Could that actually count against Trump when people are in the ballot box and they're looking at the abortion question and then they've got to look at the presidential question?
Well, look, I don't think so. I mean, I think that would just be federalism in action. I mean, if anything, I think it would reassure any voters who are thinking of voting for Trump that they can, they can tick the box for their, for their state referendum that that is pro-abortion, and then they can also vote for Donald Trump federally. So I think, I think it helps him, actually. I think it's a very smart position. And you can see from the reaction of Democrats how furious they were this week with this position from the Republicans. They, they really wanted a Lindsey Graham or a Mike Pence, type 6-week ban proposal, which is not going to be forthcoming.
Now, 2 hours after that announcement, the Biden camp organised a press call where, of course, they slammed the coverage of Trump's abortion announcement. And the headlines seemed to start changing after that. So USA Today, for instance, originally covered the news with a headline that said, quote, "The will of the people. Trump opposes national abortion ban, says states should decide." But after the press call, that was updated to, quote, "Donald Trump says states should decide abortion policy, avoids talk of a national ban." It's a little bit less endorsing, I suppose you might say, of the original position. Quite convenient.
Yes, look, that's just typical of the US media. So I'm not particularly surprised by that they take a negative view of whatever Trump says. Indeed, there was a huge fracas this week based on his remarks on Arizona. There was a decision made in the Supreme Court there in that state that would basically ban abortion based on some law from 1864, I believe, which of course is a long way away. And Trump was asked about this on the tarmac somewhere as he was taking off, and he said, "Look, I think that state's gone too far." And of course, then the media was saying, "Oh, he's changed his position." But I mean, he was just expressing his opinion on one state's decision. I think Trump said that they would straighten it out at some point. And of course, that's what's going to happen. I mean, this is democracy. I mean, my view is that many of the laws on the books in these 12 or 15 states that have very strict laws, those laws are out of touch with the will of their citizens. And so it's just a matter of time before they are watered down. So I think that's something that abortion advocates can look forward to.
And, obviously it will probably upset some arch-conservatives, but let's be real, who else are they going to vote for? And Trump has to be in the business of winning the popular vote. Let's go to Joe Biden. He said that he's considering Australia's request to end the decade-long push to prosecute WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, of course, over the release of troves of classified documents. Have a look.
Do you have a response to Australia's request that you end Julian Assange's prosecution?
We're considering it.
Now, of course, it wasn't the most considered answer in the world, though, nor is any answer you get from Joe Biden, really. No. But should we take some solace out of this? I suppose, of course, there's been a fair bit of support for Julian Assange across the political spectrum in Australia of late, that perhaps there could be something on the cards. There's been talk of even a plea bargain. We don't know whether or not that would be forthcoming, but should we perhaps take heed that there might be either a lesser sentence or even a drop of the case?
Yes, well, I think we certainly should rather. I think it was good news. Look, it was a very halting answer, I agree, very typical of Joe Biden, but I think that he meant to say it. And certainly the embassy here has taken it seriously. I think the Australian government's taken it seriously. Some of Assange's lawyers who I've spoken to are taking it seriously. And of course, it does come a few weeks after a piece in the Wall Street Journal that says people inside the Justice Department were thinking of downgrading the charges quite significantly to misdemeanors, which would basically mean that he could be released. So I think there is some truth to this, and so there should be. I mean, the Australian Parliament has passed motions on this. There've been a number of visits to Washington from US senators and MPs, pleading for clemency here. And we are one of the US's best allies, maybe the best ally, and so I think we should get something in return from that. And so I do hope that this leads to a dropping of the charges.
Just very quickly, Australia and the AUKUS partners, the US and the UK, have confirmed speculation that they'll consider other countries, including Japan, in some of the alliance's advanced military systems. Obviously, this is likely to antagonise China, given its long opposed AUKUS. What else did we learn from the Prime Minister of Japan's visit, Fumio Kishida's visit to the White House this week?
Well, look, I mean, it was mainly around the AUKUS Pact and the willingness of Japan to take part in projects related, to the second part of AUKUS, which is the development of advanced weapons and advanced weapons systems. Look, I must say it's all very vague and it's very far out into the never. It's quite it's quite hard to get excited as a journalist about, promises that are made for the 2030s. I mean, that's still 7 years away. Many things can happen. Many governments can change. But look, I think it's good news that Japan wants to get involved. But I think there is a risk to some extent with AUKUS of having too many cooks in the kitchen. I mean, as more and more countries want to join, there's more and more bureaucracies, more and more issues. So we really need to bed down, from Australia's point of view, we really need to bed down the subs. That is the most important thing. I think the Pillar 2 bit is quite secondary in my view.
Adam Crichton, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Caleb.
Now let's bring in Eric Shiner, Editor-in-Chief at the Media Research Centre. Eric, welcome. Earlier this week, protesters were caught on video at a rally in Michigan. This is a pro-Palestinian rally saying death to America. Have a look. Now, the White House condemned it. They put out a statement, but there was essentially no coverage of this by the lefty media at all in the US, Eric. The ABC, CBS, NBC, all seemingly asleep at the wheel. You would have thought shouting death to America at a rally would be something worthy of some coverage.
Yeah, and ABC, NBC, CBS, their nightly evening newscasts had no coverage of this. They're basically in this pro-Biden coma. They'll send reporters out, especially to the Dearborn, Michigan area, to talk to voters and try to find out, what would it take to get Joe Biden's vote? But when they see a split in the Democratic Party like this, where you have people out there, this pro-Hamas supporters shouting death to America, well, they don't want to cover that. They don't want to highlight the split within the leftist part of the Democratic Party.
There was a bit of a shift, though, from Biden this week when it came to Israel. The US view, or the view of the US administration anyway, had been softening on Israel. But obviously now we've got the news that there could be an imminent attack from Iran. And Biden seemed to switch his support back to Israel very quickly. What a surprise.
Yeah, it's not a surprise there. Look, the U.S. has a long legacy of support, of standing by Israel. Obviously, it's a political season. There's a presidential election. He has this split in his party. He's trying to play both sides as much as he can. But I think when push comes to shove and you see Iran, making these threats against Israel, you know that the U.S. is going to come to Israel's aid.
If only the US hadn't given billions and billions and billions of dollars to Iran, hey? Now, the Biden administration, I can't get over it. I mean, it's got to be the greatest policy of all time, right? There's been backlash after Joe and Kamala toured some swing states earlier in the week. They unveiled plans to write off almost $500 billion of outstanding college debt. Have a listen.
Loans will be completely forgiven, regardless of your income, and even if you did not graduate. Forgiveness will be automatic for the vast majority of the 25 million people that we believe will benefit from this approach.
It's not exactly a coincidence that one of these states was Wisconsin, was it?
No, not at all. And especially they made the announcement in Madison, Wisconsin, which is the flagship for the University of Wisconsin, because they have a large college and youth population. Look, this is basically trying to buy votes. You're going out. It's a battleground state. The polls show it's about a 47-47 split between Biden and Trump. You need to get voters energized. He's hoping he can go forth and buy vote. Of course, the Supreme Court has, ruled against him making these kind of sweeping, basically giveaways of money for student debt. They've said he can't do it. He's going to try it again another way. He's going to see if it works this time. It's just an attempt to basically try to buy votes and see if he can get the youth interested in voting for Joe Biden.
Well, I mean, it's literally buying votes, right? He tried to do it unilaterally, and of course the Supreme Court knocked that down and said it has to be done with the support of Congress. But I mean, it's an extraordinary amount of money to say that you are going to write off. And of course, it comes on top of Kamala Harris a few weeks ago suggesting that students would essentially be paid for signing people up to go and vote. I mean, they couldn't make it any more obvious that they are desperate to buy with money the votes of young people.
No, it becomes pretty clear, especially you saw a part of the Kamala Harris speech, and she actually says, even if you didn't finish college, so basically truckers, plumbers, construction workers, people that didn't go to college, or people that finance their college education responsibly, this is going to be on their backs. It's just a redistribution of wealth in an attempt to buy votes. And of course, it's extremely questionable whether it's even legal, given the Supreme Court decision earlier. But you know, Joe Biden says he's all about American institutions, but not the Supreme Court when it goes against him. In that case, he's going to try to find a way around it.
Yeah, well, I talked in my editorial about his reverence for the Supreme Court and whether or not they would knock down any potential moves to close the border. It's amazing, you know, Joe Biden respects the Supreme Court over here, but not so much over here. Now, how good is this? During an event in Houston this week, Texas Representative Sheila Jackson Lee told students, amongst a vast array of other falsities, that the moon is made up of gases and perhaps we could live on it. Have a listen.
A full moon is that complete rounded circle, which is made up mostly of gases.
She then went on curiously to suggest, you know, the moon's made up of gases, we could maybe live on that, but, you know, the sun is probably a bit too hot. What, you reckon?
I think if you believe Sheila Jackson Lee, you're surprised the moon just didn't explode from the gases getting so close to that hot sun during the eclipse. The moon should be gone. Not only does she say this, she gets mad at Republicans who laugh at it and criticize her. She went on the House floor. She went into Congress on Tuesday and said, you know, she couldn't admit she was wrong, but she was upset that some on the right were laughing at her interpretation of elements of the eclipse. It's not an interpretation. This is what the left does. The facts don't matter. It's their interpretation. It's their truth. They're going to speak their truth, and you can't correct them. They can't possibly be wrong. So, yeah, Sheila Jackson Lee, the moon should have blown up during the eclipse, I guess, because it's a round ball of gas. It's round. I don't know if you caught that. That was very important to her.
I hadn't noticed.
You didn't know a full moon is round.
Look, she said that it was because of a lust for stupidity from the critics. Well, if you didn't hand up the stupidity, there would be no lust for it. Eric Scheider, thank you so much for your time. Well, after the break, I'll tell you who in America should be exempt from paying tax. But the great leaders of the world have most often been great orators, and the greatest have been those who can give a good stump speech, you know, speak passionately and articulately without a script. So have a look at Sleepy Joe this week about America's relationship with Israel and pay very close attention to his sunglasses.
And it's tied to the hostages. There are a number of hostages that are being held by the Hamas. And just yesterday, we're meeting with the Vice President, our National Security Advisor. Before that, and they're American hostages as well. And they know how committed we are, the whole team, to getting their loved ones home.
I mean, God, he'd probably turn up to a poker tournament wearing them too. But you can see clearly he is reading the answer verbatim. The notes are reflected in his sunnies. And not only that, the list and order of journalists who could ask questions was pre-planned.
The next question. Who do I call on next? Hang on a second. I got my list here. Hang on. I apologize. Aurelia of AFP.
The questions were obviously prepared too, given he was reading out the answers. And then when the reporters tried to ask the questions that they actually want answered,
Thank you. Why didn't everybody holler at once?
I'll ask you briefly on the issue.
We have never been in safer hands. John Fund after the break. Welcome back. Caleb Bond in for James Morrow this week. Now, we often look at our politicians and wonder how the hell these people can possibly be the best to represent us. I mean, for heaven's sake, In a country of 333 million people, the presidential race will be between an 81-year-old who has to wear sneakers with his suits because he's so unsteady on his feet, and Donald Trump, who, if he's elected, would be 82 by the time his term ends in 2028. Biden would be 86 by the time he leaves office if he's re-elected. That is, if he's not carted out in a box before that. 86! But it's not just the ageing who are a problem. Have a look at the cogs going over in the Texas Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's head as she raises the idea of reparations for African Americans by exempting them from taxes.
One of the things that they propose is black folk not have to pay taxes for a certain amount of time, because then again, that puts money back in your pocket. But at the same time, it may not be as objectionable to some people about actually giving out dollars. But obviously then you start dealing with the different tax brackets and things like that. And that's one of the reasons that, you know, we argue the reparations make sense, because so many black folk, not only do you owe for the labor that was stolen and killed and all the other things, right? But the fact is, like, we end up being so far behind, right? And so it's like, how do you bring forth people? Exactly. And so it's like, if you do the no tax thing for people that are already, say, struggling and aren't really paying taxes in the first place, it doesn't really, exactly.
She goes from black people not having to pay taxes to, well, maybe black people already aren't paying taxes. God help us. But quite seriously, the idea that you would even seriously suggest that certain racial groups shouldn't pay tax because of their skin colour is absurd. It's what's called, you know, racist. And I'm sure Oprah Winfrey, Jay-Z, Robert Smith, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, they'll all be pleased to hear that they're tax-free. But don't think that these kinds of ideas won't be taken seriously. I mean, here in Australia, former Victorian Treaty Advancement Commissioner Auntie Jill Gallagher has suggested that Aboriginal people should be exempt from land tax, council rates, and should have access to interest-free loans. And instead of ruling it out straight away, Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen said everything was on the table. Starts with some dopey no-name congresswoman thinking out loud, but just you watch. This won't be the last you hear of black Americans being exempt from tax. Well, let's bring in a great friend of the show, political journalist John Fund. John, welcome. Inflation in the US accelerated in March for the third straight month, keeping prices painfully high for millions of Americans. But don't worry, here's the left denying it as usual.
I anticipate inflation will continue the remarkable progress that it's made.
We have seen over the past several months is that inflation is down.
He was terrible for the economy. Thank goodness Joe Biden got into office.
It's currently sitting at 3.5%, the inflation rate. How much do you think the economy will determine the election later this year?
For many voters, it is not only an important issue, it is the most important issue. Look, someone who wants to buy a house. The housing affordability in the United States right now is lower than it has been since the 1980s, which was the last great inflation. Interest rates are up. They've only gone down just a little bit. And everything else that's associated with a house, whether it's maintenance, whether it's property insurance, whether it's home repairs, has gone up dramatically. Let's say you want to buy a car. Cars are much more expensive now. They're much more expensive now because Biden's the environmental regulations have increased the price of cars. Inflation has added to the price of cars. And then we haven't even gotten to groceries. Eggs up 30%, gasoline up 30% since Biden took office. Americans may be seeing less inflation than a couple of years ago, but their memories are fixed on all the ground they lost since Biden took office.
Of course, and it's all good and well for the inflation rate to be lower now than it was a few years ago, but when inflation starts going up again, you've got to ask the question about how you get to that point. I mean, here in Australia, I always talk about there are three issues that matter to people: cost of living, cost of living, cost of living. And I think that's pretty certain around the rest of the Western world. Now, I spoke about this earlier in the show. Biden has claimed he's unsure whether he has the power to use executive action to turn away migrants, to potentially close the southern border. I detailed how he hasn't had so much regard for the Supreme Court, particularly when it came to things like student loans that he wanted to erase. We know what Donald Trump did with executive actions to close the southern border. How can it be true that he couldn't also have powers to do something about migration?
Because Biden doesn't listen to the Constitution. He listens to the left-wing pressure groups that are telling him, we're going to be very upset if you take on a policy that people will say you're borrowing from bad orange man, Donald Trump. And I have to tell you, Biden was knocked down by the Supreme Court on student loans, as you referenced earlier. And what did he say? Well, I'll try a different approach. I'll salami slice it. I'll take one group of students and forgive their loans and see if that works. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't say the Supreme Court doesn't have any say in this, and at the same time claim that the Supreme Court is going to be the all-high arbiter of everything that you agree with. So it's picking and choosing, but that's not how our system is supposed to work.
And then, of course, you've got the people who are already in the country. And I mean, you've only got to look at New York City. They're dealing with a wave of migrant crime. But immigration experts are basically saying it's incredibly difficult, both legally and logistically, for the feds to remove migrants before they've actually been convicted of a crime. And part of this comes from the city's sanctuary laws, which of course bar local police from contacting US immigration and customs enforcement. I mean, as I said in my editorial at the top of the show, why, if you were thinking of going somewhere in the world, why would you not want to be an illegal immigrant in the US? I mean, you're basically encouraged to do it, and the system is set up in your favour.
Well, it's very sad because we have over 1 million people who have been waiting patiently in line to either renew their green cards, permits to live in the United States, or to get new ones. They, of course, have paid hundreds of dollars in legal fees and are still not getting due process. People who walk across the border, they're taking advantage of these laws that many of these cities passed 20, 30 years ago, declaring themselves sanctuary cities, basically moral breastfeeding that they were good people. Well, now that the migrants are landing on their doorstep and costing them tremendous amounts of money and also disruption on the streets and crime, they, of course, won't change their sanctuary laws. They're just calling on the federal government to send more money. It's a classic example of how badly governed American cities are. Rather than fix the problem, they continue to keep the political correctness that they so dearly love. And the victims, of course, are often the minorities, the legal minorities who live in the states.
To this point, John, have a look at what a legal migrant said to the former Republican presidential primary candidate Vivek Ramaswamy.
Okay, what's your name? Fabio. I'm Colombian. Listen, you are. To me. I'm Colombian. I'm legal. I'm citizen.
Good. Thank you. I'm saying that people come to this country illegally.
Let me tell you something. Americans are so naive, they don't understand. They took over the crime in Colombia, Peru, Argentina, Venezuela. They're real criminals. They don't
Literally,
understand
they're just
it.
exporting the criminals to this country.
They don't understand it.
Yeah, well, I understand it.
Americans are so naive, they don't get it.
Yeah, well, we're going to make sure that
they will destroy America.
So naive, he says, and I don't think he's wrong.
No, in fact, I'll give you an example from my native California. A few weeks ago, it was found that a group of young Chileans, young males between 18 and 25, were flying regularly into Los Angeles, casing out very wealthy neighborhoods, and then burglarizing them, and then selling the proceeds on the internet or through various fences. They were calling it shopping tourism. They would come to the United States, shop around, steal whatever they wanted, and then fly back to Chile and plan their next excursion back to the United States. That's not what our country is supposed to be about. We want immigrants. We want legal immigrants. What we don't want is the disrespect of the entire world, which doesn't believe we're a real country because we no longer have real borders.
Just very quickly, John, Donald Trump's request to delay his hush money criminal trial was denied on Wednesday, which is the third time this week his lawyers' attempts to delay the trial have failed. It's set for April 15, which of course is in just a few days. Do we expect that that will be the case? It'll go ahead then?
Yes, this was the first indictment and it will be the first trial. It's the weakest trial. Even liberal legal commentators have noted that this is a novel approach, breaking every former precedent of law. That doesn't mean much, though, with a New York jury, unless there's a surprising holdout juror who leads to a hung jury. People would generally believe that Donald Trump will be convicted. But the charges are so strained and so far away from what I think are more serious charges, like the obstruction of justice and concealing classified documents. I don't think it will have a major political effect on the Trump campaign.
One thing I think is for certain is it was probably the worst hush money paid of all time. John Fund, thank you for your time. Coming up, Cara Kennedy, who for some reason or another decided to move to Biden's America, but she'll take us through the revolt against diversity and inclusion garbage. But before we get to the break, it's always a nice day for the aforementioned Biden when they let him out of the aged care home known as the White House for an afternoon constitutional this week with the Japanese Prime Minister. This way, Mr. President. Yes, just a few more steps. Keep going. The steadiest man who ever walked. More, please. The band really makes it, doesn't it? He's just got that real march vibe going on about it. Cara Kennedy after the break. Joining us now to tackle identity politics is commentator Cara Kennedy. Cara, welcome. There's been a building revolt against DEI initiatives in America, it would seem, thank God. A few recent examples, you've had the University of Florida has eliminated all DEI positions, and there's a new law in Texas where DEI officers were axed at major schools. You know, it's baby steps, I suppose, but is America starting to wake up to the damage that these identity politics have created?
Well, Caleb, I keep saying that we're nearing the end of the mass hysteria and psychosis of 2020. And I think I'm mostly right, but we're not quite there yet. I think during 2020, most companies were simply bullied into following the crowd or following a trend. And definitely back then, the chief diversity officer role or any other kind of role in the DEI sphere was probably the most fashionable and well-paid position in America. It's taken about 3 or 4 years now for people to realize what a mistake that was. And in the University of Florida, for example, all of the DEI employees now have to get real jobs and stop their grifting. The 12 weeks of severance pay should help a lot, though, because it's definitely more than most Americans get.
But a stark reminder, we aren't there just yet. A school in Seattle has shuttered its gifted and talented program because the school board determined that they had too many white and Asian students and not enough black students. So you throw the baby out with the bathwater. We better get rid of this thing because it must be racist, instead of saying, oh, well, maybe we should, provide some extra support to black students to get them up to speed.
Yeah, unsurprisingly, it's the woke school board that is causing problems around this. The parents of black students actually asked the board to reconsider closing it and said, why don't we just find ways to incorporate black children, like you just said, offer extra support into the gifted program rather than just shutting it down for the few black people that were involved. And when the parents of the black students told the board you don't help by cutting the program. For everybody, they were told that they were tokenizing their children. So yeah, this is a complete mess, and it's definitely all down to the school board.
But, you know, it's the woke that do it. But can they not see the forest for the trees? Because what you're essentially saying is that either the program is racist or there must be some sort of discrepancy in intelligence on the basis of race. Now, I would imagine that neither of those are necessarily true. If you've got a problem with, let's say, black students have got lower standards or lower results than the other students in their classroom, the obvious answer would seem to be to give them the support they need to get up to speed, not to sell everyone else short. And when the parents, as you say, point out themselves that they don't want to get rid of their program, I mean, it's not as though there were no black students, it's just that they reckoned that white and Asian students were overrepresented. So as in many of these cases, you've actually dudded the black students as much as anyone else.
Yeah, exactly. And as usual, it's the white liberals that create the big drama around it. And it's the black parents that are saying, no, we don't want you to do this, actually, because this doesn't help anybody. This just means that nobody now gets support instead of, I think it was 50% white, 30% Asian, and then the rest black. So it ruined it for everybody.
And here's another reminder. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced last week that Zakiya Carr-Johnson had been appointed as their chief DEI officer, and he touted her expertise. Well, she previously called America a failed historic model and demanded the destruction of tradition at every juncture on the altar of anti-racism. Well, I mean, she does actually sound well qualified to the job, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, leave it to the American government to be the last people to realise that we've moved on from these grandstanding gestures. The State Department claimed that she is a social inclusion, diversity and equity expert. I mean, what does that even mean? It's so ridiculous. She's previously called for a cultural shift in America. I mean, has she been sleeping for the last decade? Like, I don't think we could shift really anymore. She's also blasted the US as a failed historic model, but she's very happy to take what is presumably a huge paycheck from the same country that she supposedly hates.
Now, Cara, you and I have been talking on this channel for a long time. You're a POM. We talked when you lived over in the UK. What on earth made you move to Biden's America?
Everybody here does get paid a lot more than the UK, is what I've realised.
Well, I don't
know if you can hear the rain. I don't know if you can hear the rain right now, and I'm in like a huge rainstorm, but it's usually less rain than the UK.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, but you've got to deal with Biden. I mean, have a look at this. You know, his age, his mental fitness, we know is not fantastic. And this week's gaffe, amongst others, occurred at the conclusion of a joint press conference with Japan's Prime Minister. Have a listen.
Elect me. I'm in the 20th century.
The 20th century. I mean, come on.
It's just another day that Joe Biden doesn't know what year it is. I mean, unfortunately, this is probably one of his more forgivable gaffes. Usually he's mixing up dead world leaders for current ones or getting facts about his own son's death wrong. I mean, the man very clearly can't string a sentence together at this point. He really has to go.
Goodness me. And you moved there. Cara Kennedy, thank you so much for your time. Well, after the break, your favourite segment, Only in America, and I'll bring you the story of a uniquely US traveller. But before that, let's check in on US daytime TV show The View, where they this week interrogated whether the solar eclipse was caused by climate change.
We've got a solar eclipse. We've got the earthquake. She ran down the hallway.
The rapture is here.
The rapture's here. And then also I learned that the cicadas are coming. All those things together would maybe lead one to believe that, you know, either climate change exists or something is really
returning.
Oh, my God. Send me to the moon. Only in America is next. Now it's time to shine a light on the weird and wacky capital of the world in a little segment we like to call Only in America. And this week, it's the travails of a mountain goat who was stolen, taken 2 hours away to Kansas City, and somehow found himself stuck on a bridge.
Look at him now. It's hard to believe what he's been through. On Monday night, the mountain goat somehow found its way to a ledge on a 63rd Street bridge about 80 feet above ground. Word spread on social media. Abby White showed up to watch the rescue and showed KMBC's Matt Evans she brought a possible enticement or reward for the goat.
I want it to be safe. Like, I love animals, so.
And you love goats?
I have a carrot on me.
You
Actually,
do?
yeah.
Do you really?
I have a carrot.
It turns out it was the goat's second visit to KC Pet Project. His original owners claim someone stole the goat from their farm 2 hours away from Kansas City. After several sightings, animal control officers captured him on Independence Avenue in March. After a local family adopted him, a few days later, he jumped a fence and had been on the loose again until Monday's rescue. The goat's original owners are expected to come and pick him up and take him home tomorrow.
All's well that ends well, I suppose. If only that silly old goat Joe Biden would go missing. Well, that's all we have time for tonight. I'm Caleb Bond. Keep fighting the good fight. Up next is the Media Show with Jack Howden. Good night.